Just thinking about it. There we go.
Yeah.
Cool. So yes, certificates, Kate, adoption. So after last week's meeting, I went ahead and did another iteration on the design document. Hopefully everyone, or anyone that wants to, has had a chance to read it now. But basically, I tried to go ahead and write down basically all of our thoughts from last meeting and get them on paper, and then we can kind of go from there. I think it's kind of starting to get towards some kind of solution that I think a lot of people are happy with. I know, Obe and Mal, you added quite a few review stuff this morning, but I guess they're not necessarily, well, I guess a lot of like grammar and stuff like that. But I don't know if they're necessarily like big kind of design question, kind of problems with it. Yeah, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong. But I guess to go through it again, like I did last time. So we want to add this kind of CSR resource to cert-manager, and potentially in future, probably we should, maybe not, change the certificate request resource to be change the certificate request resource to be the certificate signing request. So motivations, I put down the kind of more ones that we spoke about last week. So this is like integrations with third-party projects, which will use the upstream API. The request resource is managed by the API, so it's got better kind of a better security profile because the user info fields are managed by the API server. The consumers of the API don't have a hard dependency on cert-manager in terms of the kind of certificate request CRD and the webhook being up and running. They just kind of have a dependency on the API server, basically. Cool. So the kind of, yeah, go.
Yeah, I just added this morning a quick summary of what we said last week about the problem of the operations team being in charge of the webhook and CRD's operation, and the developer team who will be running the cert-manager controllers and so on. This is something I think James brought up, and it was very interesting because I did not see the point of using the CSR resource before hearing this story, before hearing this use case. Like having these, because the CSR allows, because it is built in and it doesn't require a webhook being managed. It means there is less coupling between the operations team and the developer team. So that's something I added.
That sounds good. It would be good, onto your point of like you didn't see a reason other than that, it would be good to make sure that we have clearly written down and agreed upon like the motivation for this, because that isn't the only reason for it. And I'm just thinking when it comes to future, like when it comes to actually considering like how we do things, I think it's important for us to have a shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But yeah, that does sound good though.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find any other reason. So
yeah, no, yeah, it's a good thing to raise. It's really important that, like with any decision, especially something this complex, it's really important that we agree and have a shared understanding, I think.
So do these, for you, Mar, do these 3 points basically, like they're not good motivations, basically, for you?
Maybe it's because it's not as like it helps me to actually have like an exemplify the use case. Like, so the first one, extensiveness, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but it's like I mean, the 3 points. Yeah, actually the third paragraph, consumers of this API, it's great. It just needs an example to really make sure people who read this actually understand the implication of what we mean by consumers, and like the difference between consumers and like what we mean by hard dependency, for example.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the only thing that is missing. But I think the motivations are already written. They just need some examples, I guess.
So you're talking more like
I guess.
you need user stories, I guess, for each of the points.
Yeah, just exactly what James said the last time. Like this story about the operations team having like security policies that they want to enforce. So they want to be the ones managing the webhook and CRDs versions and like.
I guess, yeah, one of the things that I think it kind of partly is maybe if we make some of these a bit more concrete, it seems to me like when you read into it, I to some extent can see what Mel's saying there. Like we say in the first paragraph there, it gives us the ability to integrate with components that otherwise we wouldn't have. I think that bit there is the bit that needs like highlighting, because that is one of the key motivations, that it's a like common ground for other projects to integrate against too. And I think that there is a big one. Like Istio not wanting to add support for certificate request resources, but wanting to support certificate signing request is us. Like that's the motivating factor, right?
Oh,
I don't
that's a
know
great
quite
example.
what the plan is
Yes,
there,
I
but there's
wasn't
other
aware of
places,
this.
like Cube Builder as well could do this. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I guess also, I'm just trying to think of some more. If there is one upstream type to represent exactly what we're doing, then it kind of makes sense for us to use it. Because otherwise we're just reinventing the same. Like you wouldn't create deployment 2. You would just use deployments.
To be fair, someone has
yeah.
done that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got like 5 different things that are suffix deployment at the end of the controller name, and it drives me mad. But
Okay, so I think
yeah.
from this then, like the points themselves are valid and they make sense. They just need user stories basically. I guess is the.
Should I add a comment to that area as we go, just so that we don't lose track of it? So we should expand this out a little bit to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, sounds good.
Oh, thanks.
Cool.
James.
I'll do that now.
Cool. So I think the next bit is the goals, I guess. Add certificate signing request signer controllers to cert-manager for all issuer types. So yeah, all of the internal issuer types that we have, just add certificate signing request controllers for them. Mal, I think like in passing, I think I saw you make a comment about I'm using controllers in the plural. Does that mean that I'm kind of suggesting that we're doing the kind of same thing with the certificate signing request as we're doing with certificate request stuff, where we have one controller for each type? And I think that is true, and that makes sense. Pave a way for complete adoption of the certificate signing request resource in future if wanted. So I'm still using quite a lot of ambiguous words when talking about whether we want to completely replace the resource. Yeah, I think that's something that we need to come to a conclusion to. Then non-goals, remove the certificate request resource. That's the conversation we need to have about whether we ever remove the resource at all. And when we ever drop support for it, basically. I know what people's thoughts are about those goals.
I personally think long term, if we're not going to do all of this with a view to actually remove eventually the certificate request resource and replace it with a certificate signing request, I would question whether or not we should do it at all. That's my feeling. I think there is a place for the certificate request until then. I mean, it's a V1 API. It's something we're going to have to support for a while as it is. But yeah, I think it's probably going to cause more harm than good to fork the ecosystem in this way if we're not planning on fully migrating to it. Oh yeah, sorry, Karen, Jake.
Until will we be trying to get more features into the certificate signing request resource? Because it's not like the reason, and I don't feel like it can be I don't feel like it replaces certificate request because it's missing some fields that, but I know further down it's
So-
suggested that we get them in annotations, which I don't like very much.
So, to be fair, that is the way that the certificate signing request API has been designed. To any extension, anything that isn't on there should be passed through. The likes of annotations, things like duration and requested duration have been discussed upstream, and they are things that we are like considering doing. I think the nice thing about having CRD is it does allow us to iterate quickly and to add those fields and to rush ahead and get things done, which I think we've benefited from over the last few years. But conversely, I think it's important that we do tend towards a point of stability and agreement with upstream and the rest of the community as to what we're working on. And it does also help us to, focus our efforts into improving that upstream type if we feel we need to. I don't think there's any blockers, I guess is my point. Like the annotations thing, it's not as nice having spec.duration, but it's actually not really that awful. You can apply validation to that. And we can actually come up with agreed upon annotations if needed. And this kind of helps to inform how that happens upstream. So that's my kind of thoughts. I get what you're saying. There are areas where it's not the same. I still namespacing is going to be the biggest pain for us to deal with in all this, and that is the biggest difference. But yeah, the individual fields missing actually bothers, personally, I think that bothers me less. I think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. But yeah.
Okay.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that though? It's not just what I think.
So why is the upstream certificate signing request not namespaced?
So this, like, there's two things to it. First of all, historical reasons, which is never the best answer. It was created for nodes, and so I think, yeah. The other side of it, though, because I did raise this when we were making amendments to the type and originally talking about this, is that there's kind of an understanding that signers in the context of like signing CAs ultimately are, I don't want to say public things because they're not all exposed publicly, but they're all kind of like you as one entity might need to verify the certificate of another. Like they kind of exist in a fairly shared space was the response I got back. And so creating the distinction between namespaces was problematic. I would say though, this is exactly the sort of question we should be taking to SIG Auth. And we should be joining these SIG Auth calls, and if we're not already, and asking these questions to see kind of as well to clarify like the expected uses for it, the expected ways to build upon this. Given we do have a requirement in some instances for people to be able to spin up their own, short-lived temporary CAs in like I think that's where we tend to, correct me if I'm wrong, but the places where we really, really see usage of namespacing and like people liking namespacing is self-signed issuers and CA issuers when someone wants to set up a CA for their database or something. Yeah.
Well, sure, it's important. This is written anyway. It's important when you've got different teams wanting to use Cloudflare, the Cloudflare issuer.
So
the Cloudflare issuer.
DNSO one.
Yeah, no. or maybe the Venafi issuer with that team's personal credentials and.
So, yeah, I think that there is valid when you consider it from the way that we structure things today. I think there's a slightly different vision in that to some extent you should be able to say, I just want to request a certificate from Venafi TPP, or I want to, I guess in more reality with Venafi, I want to request certificates from Digicert. The information passed along with a certificate signing request should provide enough information to have you get that certificate. If you need to speak to a different signer, you would change the signer name. Like if you need to speak to a different, say, Venafi TPP server, you could have a different signer name for that. And then using access like approval, basically to gate who can do things. So the big thing there is really approval, becomes the replacement for the sort of access controls that namespacing provides today for us, I would say. But again, this is a really good question and discussion to have upstream, I think. As you know, we have people looking to build a big ecosystem around CSR API. Here are some of our big questions around how people should actually use it. Because I think these are all really valid questions, and I'm trying to give you answers, but they're not.
Yeah, no, yeah. I asked last time. I think I asked where is all that discussion around the upstream certificate signing request. I know the answer, but I haven't actually gone and searched through the conversations, and presumably there'll be a record somewhere of the discussions about whether they should be namespaced or whether they should have duration on there and things like that.
I think things like duration and stuff, that's only actually been discussed more recently in the passes and iterations that we made, and that was generally like pretty acceptable. I think some of the questions were around similar to the sorts of things we run into. What does it mean if a requester says, I want it for 6 days, and someone gives them a 14-day certificate?
Well, exactly.
Is that valid? Is that acceptable? Like, how should that be handled? So there's talks about having like a requested duration, or like I would like it to be roughly this long, please, maybe, as a field. Yeah, I think the other issue that we might hit, although the project would obviously want to fix this and rectify it, is that we might step into territory that predates KEPS and everything else with the initial design discussions, which is where the namespace scoped versus cluster scoped would have happened.
Right, yeah, okay.
Because that was never really on the cards for a transition from when we were working on it. There's no migration
it wasn't
strategy.
Like it wasn't ever a chance that it would be made namespaced before it went GA. It was always considered. It was always considered the node bootstrapping API, really. So I think it was designed with that in mind, and then the signer name extensions have kind of come about later. Right. So I think there is that context, and so it's definitely completely valid to say, look, we're trying to achieve these things. How should we, how should we be modeling things, or how should we best go about it? And I think today the answer really is approval. It's having approvers that can deny based on, maybe like where the issuer is. I don't know. This is what's written down, I suppose.
James,
but also that oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, sorry, just clarify, is it beta or GA now? It's GA, doesn't it, the CSR API?
GA as of 119, signer name was introduced in 118.
And so the new field you were talking about there, you can do field addition, I guess. Yeah,
so new fields, things like duration stuff.
Yeah, it's just where
that's and all of that. It's fine. It's And 1 second.
Yours.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Cool. Oh, wow. Cool. Thank you very much.
Oh, we have a delivery.
It's my birthday on Friday, and now I've got a load of. Well, I think this is a birthday present because it's on Friday, but it looks like a giant box of Brewdog because it says Brewdog on the side of it.
Brewdog is.
So I have to wait until Friday.
Yeah.
It's quite a giveaway, isn't it?
Yeah, that does give it away. I mean, unless it's not Brewdog, though, that would be funny. That would be a really good way to catch me out. Just bricks.
Like a year's supply of stock, maybe, in a Brewdog.
Yeah. My office is getting more and more full with boxes now. I've got 2. Sorry, I should just mute. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry. So yeah, I was just talking about. So you can do the addition of the fields. You were, as you're saying, like the requested duration or whatever. That's fine, right? Because you can just roll forward.
Yeah, that can all be added, and in the meantime, annotations. Like Jake says, it's not like everyone loves annotations for everything. We have fields for a reason, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm only worried about, like, you said people don't want to integrate with cert-manager, but then they're going to have to put cert-manager specific annotations in their.
So, this is why I would like us to not rush to, like, this is why we should be working upstream, because even if we make it a non-cert manager specific annotation and add a field, and then that way we've got a conversion path there as well for people on older clients, like older clusters. Like if you're running, like, yeah, we could actually build into if we can agree on the annotation upstream, that can actually form part of a conversion, I think, where you would effectively, people could add that annotation, and then when the field does exist in newer versions, it would effectively just convert that through to the field's value.
And this is SIG-auth then that we need to talk to.
Yeah, and I think we should try and like have people, like 1 or 2 people each week going to that call, being a part of it, keeping track, because it's important that we do have that point of collaboration, I think, if we're going to succeed in this. Otherwise, this is just going to slow us down massively. Well, I don't know about massively, actually. We're basically building against, the upstream project's API types, so we need to be involved in developing those API types.
If we get rid of the certificate request and just use the CSR, does it mean that we'll never be able to have passed down identity from the creator of the certificate to the CSR if we wanted down in the future?
I don't think we'd ever be able to do it in the way where we actually manually override those fields and give one user, being like the cert-manager controller, additional permissions to allow it to basically override those. No, we wouldn't be allowed to do that. I don't think we've really got a clear way to do that today. And I think from our discussions we've had, I'm not sure if that is the best way for us to approach it, because we're effectively allowing one entity to override all security controls, which is a massive risk. I think we'd have to, if we want something like that, which I think we do, we would want to probably look at passing along some signed data, something along from the cert-manager controller that can then be understood. And I really struggle to see any way around that.
That's the impersonate feature. Does that set user info?
Yeah, but we don't want the cert-manager controller to have permission to impersonate everything. I think it's... And also, again, it comes back to this thing of who do you impersonate? I really think we're trying to use Kubernetes in a way that it's not meant to be used if we do that. And I'd put a big -1 on a PR or design proposal, not in quite such a harsh way, because I think that sounds really mean, actually. But you get what I mean. I think maybe this is the cop-out way of doing it, but we should, if we are ever thinking about doing that, let's have an extensive discussion with SIG-auth around that to see what they actually think about the idea and if it's secure. And I'm sure Tim or Claire would be happy to jump on a call with us and discuss. I can reach out to him. In fact, actually, it might be worthwhile. Yeah, I'm going to actually loop Tim into this because he's involved in teams this side that this will affect too. And it'll be interesting to hear what he thinks about the idea of passing down identity or passing it along. That's another post-it note.
It's a good idea.
Cool. So for the goals then, what do we want to do? Do we want to reword it to say that we're going to replace the certificate request in future? Do we want to say that we want to drop support for certificate request in future?
I think
So
just
basically
remove
these two
if
lines here.
wanted. I think just remove if wanted from the end of the second one.
So this one here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to actually agree before we get much further upon whether. Yeah, I personally, I don't think we should. We need to agree whether we're going to remove it, because I think if we're not going to remove it, I'm not sure quite what we are looking to do here, or why. And I actually think we should really strongly consider not doing it at all. I think if we don't want to do it, but we do want to support CSR API, we'd probably just be better off having some controllers and having like a half decent shared library for talking to these issues we support today, and then just ship them separately. And if you want to put a price tag on that, you can too, or it can be open source, whatever. But And that's, so that you can get that integration with the likes of Istio or, whatever other service out there. I think if we're not going to like do it, I really I like what are the goals then? Because it sounds like the goals are then to be able to support something like Istio with CSR, and that's where I would kind of take a step back and say, well, hang on a minute, do we need to make these awkward changes to cert-manager in order to achieve the goals of securing securing Istio using XYZ? I'd rather like keep this self-contained, and then if you've got a dashboard that's watching all these different resource types, then you need to adjust that dashboard to watch 2 resource types, because that's the reality that the cert-manager project has chosen in not deciding to just have one, but to instead having multiple. I think, yeah, that's my gut feel. We either have a long-term goal to remove certificate request in favor of this, or we treat this as a distinct area altogether.
Can I just check? Are we talking about the long-term goal being to only use the upstream certificate signing request, or are we talking about the goal to be always have our own custom resource called certificate signing request, which we treat as the version of what's in the core API?
The first one, I think.
So I'm kind of against. It reminds, we'll be stuck with this using this core API, which is very difficult for us to modify, and if we need to, and it reminds me a bit of like in the land of Python programming. No one uses the standard library anymore. Everything, well, they do, but everyone just uses the packages of PyPy because it's so difficult to update anything in the standard library. So I think I'm not really making much sense, but I think by tying ourselves to this core API, we'll just be slowing ourselves down. I like what James just said. I like what you just said about supporting the core API form, but we don't need to have a goal of removing our own better version of that API, which supports namespaces and supports duration and such.
I stand by, though. I would like us to separate out things like field additions from this, because I really think they are this, like adding a duration field. I really don't think that's a major issue, because it is something that there is a recommendation upstream on for field types that aren't supported that you need to pass along to your signer, which is annotations, and then anything that is common, there is some commonality, it's to put it as a field. Now, I know we say it's harder to change. It's harder to change because we're forced to actually consider the implications of a design on a larger scale. And being perfectly honest, this is our smallest unit. This is effectively our pod, right? Or maybe even container, I suppose. It's our pod, really. And so we need to really carefully consider what we are doing with it. So I think, actually, Richard, we are somewhat in agreement in whether, like, we should either do it or we shouldn't do it. I guess I would lean more towards if we can come up with solutions to some of the issues around namespacing, and we come up with recommendations for how people should interact with it, then I think it makes sense for us to do. But I think really the crux of it is providing translations for things that people previously did. So when they did kubectl get certificate requests, we need to be explicit. Are we now basically with this saying we don't expect end users to be able to do that anymore? We expect other things to do it for, and maybe that is, and maybe that then involves, okay, so because users can no longer list that, we aggregate more information up to the certificate resource. Maybe we, and then that maybe is a forcing function for us to have better outputs from our CSR resource, like better debugging outputs that we can more easily aggregate up and display to users through the resource they want. I think it's forcing us to really think about who is responsible for what and who should have permission to do what. And yeah, I agree. We're moving from a world where we didn't have to do that so much before, because we've had a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, like So take the duration. So I think that's a bad field. My feeling is that you ask for a duration, you get back something different. Is the more I think about that, the more I come across it, the more I think it's kind of pointless. And the same with the CA.
I would say that that's like a corner case, or like that is not the norm. Like it's the norm to like a lot of users just because they're using Acme, but Acme I'd say is not the norm in terms of like PKI, right? If I ask Vault for a certain duration, like it will give me that duration. And most signers would operate that way if they have support for it, I'd say.
I mean, to some extent, duration is an issuer-specific annotation. To some, really, I mean, there's a lot of commonality, but it's kind of issuer-specific. Acme, Acme does support it now.
It does support
So
it.
it's issuer type specific. Yeah, Acme the protocol does. Let's Encryptors don't, right? But yeah, fun. I don't want to get sidetracked by a discussion around duration specifically. But there are other cases there are other fields like it too, right? Usages, although usages is encoded into the thing, that can be completely ignored if they choose. It's ultimately up to the signer what they do. The CSR is a transport, it's an envelope to put your request into.
I think like in the interest of time, I think because this is a good conversation to have, but I want to get through the proposal, I think. Because there's some feedback on some of the kind of implementation details and stuff that I'd like to, hear from people. But I think, clearly we need X number more meetings to kind of go over this. I think in terms of like goals, in the interest or like under the assumption that we're not just going to bin this, which is something that we might do, we'll just change the goal to remove in future as like a definite, I'd say. Cool. So yeah, and I'll update on that on the design document. But yeah, the things that I wanted to get some kind of feedback on or review, the read all access to certificate signing requests. So I've written here, this is a regression in security. So this is the idea that users can now list all certificate requests or list all requests in a cluster rather than like the particular namespace that they had previously. So this is a regression in security. My solution to this is basically we either write some good documentation or provide some tools with OPA or something like that, basically, that we can give people to kind of circumvent that. I think this is the only real problem that can't be addressed like in a nice way, I think. And it's something that, we'll just kind of have to live with, I guess, because there's no real kind of good solution to this one. The namespace issue, go.
Yeah, no, I'd agree on that. I think actually the OPA style thing would probably be tough as it is. I think it really requires us to have a change in thinking around like roles and responsibilities and what kind of information gets surfaced.
When I say OPA stuff, I literally mean a page on the website of like, you can do this if you want to do it. That's what I mean. I don't mean put it in cert-manager, but I mean like if you're inclined to try and do this, then do this, basically. Yeah,
absolutely. I guess I'm just conscious that if we give people say like, oh, if you need to do this, then do that, it changes that mindset for them, if you know what I mean. If we've got the mindset of individual users shouldn't be interacting with those resources, then I think we should, I'm not really saying either way we should or shouldn't have OPA examples. I think, it's good. But I think overall, the whole thing around read all access to certificate signing requests requires a change of thinking, and that like they're no longer low privileged. Well, I suppose they are low privileged to some extent, but yeah. Sorry, I feel like now I'm just rambling and interrupting. So you carry on, Josh. You've got a good structure going.
Sure.
But the alternative is to go upstream and argue the case for making their certificate signing requests a namespaced resource.
That would be a new resource altogether, though. There's no migration path from cluster scope to namespace scopes. They could create a new resource, which is a namespaced version, and now we'll have another call where we discuss how we support both of them or all three. Because some people will create one of each. You could. I mean, the thing is, and this is why I say there are other solutions. If we really wanted it, and I guess this is what some of you said before, you could actually have a namespace equivalent that is then mirrored by some privileged controller into an actual CSR type. Although that's problematic with the user info, though, like you said before. So, yeah, I don't really know if there is a good way to do it. I think we need to change the way we think if we're going to do this.
Cool. The namespace issuer reference stuff, I think that's fairly solved. Like, I think thinking about it, it seems sensible to do this kind of subject actress review type deal. So certificates is pretty solved. That's that's pretty easy to do. And then creating a certificate signing request referencing as namespace to issuer, I think is fine to do a subject actress review. I think the feedback I'd like particularly is the RBAC or the verb and noun, which might not be correct. It is
create. You've got there the next paragraph, right?
Where do I put it?
It was on the next.
That's not very helpful. Okay. Have I lost it?
It was on the next line after where you were. The verb create there within the target namespace. This will be done via a subject actress review.
The verb,
so
it doesn't have the noun though here. It has the noun somewhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it will have create permissions for certificate signing requests in that namespace, basically. But like,
so I use the verb
think
create.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, go. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the verb create. I would like if they've got create permissions to create things in the other namespace, they could just go and create it in the other namespace. I think this is probably a use case for like a synthetic verb, as it were, like a request from or something. Don't let me name things, but something that has that meaning.
Okay.
But yeah.
So like implementation wise, I think that's fine, but look on.
Yeah, no, I think the general idea makes a lot of sense. So basically using RBAC to restrict. So by default, just thinking that out the box with no additional RBAC configured, as a user that creates a certificate signing request that references a cluster scoped issuer, I wouldn't need any additional RBAC permissions to create that. The approver may deny my request, but I don't need any additional RBAC permissions to create it, correct?
Correct.
If I create one that references a namespaced issuer, then the entity creating it needs to have permission to request from, or whatever we call it, within that namespace. Now, would that be enforced at admission time, or would like an authorization time when you go to do the create, or would it be done by the approver?
No, so that is done at approval time. So it would set the deny condition, basically.
Cool.
And I think that's the sensible way to do things. At least that, I think that's the right way to be using this denied condition, I'd say. At least that's how I understand it.
I think that sounds pretty reasonable. I think it sounds quite reasonable, and it's something we could change in future if we go this way too. Like we could add the webhook more easily than we could change that bit, I think.
The duration field, I think that's a fairly solved problem. I would be in favor of using the cert-manager like a cert-manager scoped duration annotation key. At least then, like it's easier, I think, to have a migration path if there was some kind of universal upstream annotation. And again, if there became like a spec, basically, I think that's pretty easy to do, like a if switch on to kind of, migrate that if it changes in future. And it kind of scopes it to cert-manager, and we don't get any kind of weird conflicts in other places, I feel.
I'd like to just add the note on there that we should try and work upstream first to agree upon what the path forward is for that before we go and add the field, just because the migration strategy, if we agree upstream we're going to add duration, we can go in version 1.22 of Kubernetes have duration as a field there. But what we can also say is, okay, well, we need to support this back to 1.18. Can we have an agreed upon annotation key that conversion then takes care of? And that way we actually get backwards and forwards compatibility. And that makes the migration strategy a lot easier. If we have our own one, we can't hook into the conversion path because we are external. We're a consumer of the API. So we can't actually then hook into that. So then when it comes to 122 having the field, we will then have two separate ways to denote duration. And that's definitely more painful as a client.
But can't we just change it at mutation time? If we were to use our own annotation, it will change upstream later on.
So any resources that already exist, we can't mutate. So if you
we wouldn't mutate as like CSR that already exists there, right?
No, but this is like you could have. But what I'm saying is, if you've got something that's got a duration field as an annotation starting cert-manager that already exists, and then in a 122 cluster you go and get that resource, the duration field is not going to be set. Only the annotation will be. That's what I mean by this. And then likewise, if on a 122 cluster you go and explicitly set duration on a CSR that you create, the annotation won't be present, which means any clients then also like built against older versions will also not be able to see that duration field. It's only encoded as part of the spec. It'd require like a rebuild of that software. I'm not against us having our own one, but I would like us to see if we can progress those conversations forward and just get a bit of a signal. I want this to be, I think this should be collaborative with the upstream community, because otherwise we're going to basically be bending and breaking things slightly. Well, we run the risk of bending and breaking things slightly, let's say.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Otherwise, yeah, that I agree with what you're saying. I do agree with what you're saying.
Yeah,
in this paragraph.
That makes sense. Cool. So the CA field, basically the exact same thing. Base64 encoded as well for happy copy paste users, or to make users happy with copy and paste. I think it makes sense. And external issuers. Basically, this is there to just say that we need to have some kind of signal to other users or like external issuer developers that they need to migrate, basically, and updating our example repository effectively.
The CA field, just quickly, the CA field, there was similar discussion upstream about adding status.ca. I need to dig it out, and I'll go through and try and find the links to both the discussion for duration and CA to see if we can include links to that there. So we've got a bit of a breadcrumb trail in this doc.
Yeah, I consider both of these basically the same problem and the same solution, I think.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun annotation block.
Yeah. Especially if we do pass down as well. Cool. So the actual kind of implementation bits here. So this paragraph, basically how we want to do the swap, if it's like a command line flag or something like that, is, yeah, basically we can change a command line flag over the controller. This bit basically saying that if we want to enable both the controllers at the same time, and basically the CSR controllers will be a best effort in the case where I think that's what I've written here anyway. In the case where we like enable the controllers as the kind of don't enable the flag to enable the CSR, then it will try and enable them by looking up the discovery API. Though I think that's probably not needed, considering the Kubernetes versions that we support. So I think we could probably get rid of this paragraph, to be honest. Then the concept of issuer references. So yeah, we basically need to decide on how we want to do the API. I think in my head, this seems like a sane solution to do.
So there's a few changes you need to make to that. Like, this is actually one of the points when we designed the CSR API in the sign and name field. We actually basically spec'd out how cert-manager could reference arbitrary things, because you have to consider external issuers, and within your sign and name schema there, it doesn't, because you haven't got space for the resource name. You've only got the API group. So what you need is.
I was thinking that this is the group, right? So the same way you do.
It's not the resource. So how do you know to create an issuer there, or to like? So what we've settled on was and I've added a comment. It's resource type name, not kind name. Resource name, dot group name / optional namespace dot resource name. And the limitations on the signer name field, there's a 581 character limit on that field to the number of characters in there, and that is specifically very confusingly chosen to allow us to represent any combination of resource name, API group, namespace dot resource name, taking account of the maximum limits of all of those types of fields today. So the example here then would be issuers.cert-manager.io / namespace dot issuer name, or cluster issuers.cert-manager.io / the name of it.
Okay, that makes sense. So you still have this, because I think Google made a comment on this as well on the previous design, that I'm keen to have as well, that we don't lose this like loose coupling of like an issuer that might be backed by like the CA isn't defined in the signer name, if that makes sense. So we might be referencing a CA signer, but the CA, the word CA doesn't exist in the signer name, basically, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, and I mean, I think with dynamic registration of issuers, we are going to struggle to do that quite so well if we also allow arbitrary resource. Well, we're basically allowing arbitrary resources to be referenced, right? You could go and create a CRD tomorrow and reference it. I think we're really going to struggle to get away from that with just a signer name field. I would also question what they're trying to achieve there, because even today, if you wanted to swap out the issuer that you're using in a live running cluster, I don't think we'd recommend you updating your issuer resource and then just letting it go. We'd probably tell you to create a new issuer and update your resources. But yeah, I basically, given we've only got the signer name to denote that, unless we start using annotation to encode more information, there's no way we can just have arbitrary things, unless we also create some mapping resource, which is like signer names. But even then, RBAC then gets complex. The whole thing gets really complex. Like the RBAC. So the other thing to note here is that there's RBAC restrictions around who can approve and who can sign for different signer names. And you can grant wildcard things. So basically, as long as you define the first section, you can do /star, which would allow you to say permit one entity to be the approver for all tpps.venify.com /star, which would be all basically approve anything that's TPP or of resource type TPP. But yeah, I think we're really going to struggle to loosely couple that. But I also don't think we loosely couple it today. Today we encode the kind, the group, and everything else. I know we do have the issuer type, which is our generic point and a hop off, but it's also one of our biggest pains and something we don't want from every conversation we've ever had. Like the idea of splitting it into like a TPP issuer and a Vault issuer and things like that, that's come up loads. Okay. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to. It's kind of like certificate class, isn't it? Is what they're alluding to, right? And I can see value in that. And maybe actually that is something we could do through the likes of a mutation hook. You add an annotation to your CSR resource, which is your certificate class, and then you can have a mutating hook that sets the signer name appropriately automatically for you. Or something better. Or you could do it on the certificate resource. Basically, the certificate resource could switch to using something different altogether, and then we can do whatever mapping we want, however we want it. This is quite a low building block, I guess, the CSR. Interesting discussion. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not particularly
what do you think?
to the signer name. Like, I think as long as we have, I quite like to see cert-manager in there. I think that makes sense. It can't be.
Well, for external types, for external issuers.
Oh, for external issues, it won't have cert-manager in. That's my point, basically.
Yeah. It's, I mean, and the reason why it's cert-manager.io is because it's like the issuer resource is part of the cert-manager.io group, so it'd be issuers.cert-manager.io.
Yeah.
Similar to issuers. Well.
Cool. No, that makes sense. I quite like that. Yeah, I think I made a point about that point here. Yeah, and then just like, yeah, it does the same thing. Signers, basically we copy the same annotations that we need for particular signer specific stuff. And Acme, basically the orders will be created in the same namespace that the issuer resides in. So if that is a namespace issuer, it will be in that namespace. If it's a class issuer, it will be in cert-manager. That I know might change in future. We should have, I think that's a separate discussion to have. Very quickly to go through the conditions because we're running out of time. Basically, we use all the same well-known condition types, approved, denied, and failed, and then we also add pending. So we have the same. So yeah, because we have pending as like a well-known condition type in certificate requests, so we should map that over, and I think that should be fine. We then copy the approved, denied, and failed over to the certificate request as well to have like parity in their kind of condition states. The approved condition will always be set to true, so long as that kind of namespace reference, like subject access review condition is met, in absence of having any kind of like other policy stuff inside cert-manager. But that's like a whole separate design document.
Is that restricted to just our issuer types?
Correct.
Our
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Cool. And then also, sorry to jump in, pending. That doesn't exist upstream, and I guess the reason why is because if something is neither approved or denied, then it is pending by definition. I'm not against it because, to be honest, conditions are easier. Every single time we do something that isn't in accordance with upstream, we will create at least one person somewhere in the world some pain.
Okay.
So I am conscious. I'm not against that. I would like to see, again, discussion upstream. I'd really expect a lot of this doc to basically be us just aligning with what is supported today and then highlighting the areas similar, like pending, where, okay, this isn't there. And then duration, that isn't there. CA isn't there. And that way we can then, this is almost our task list of things to get SIG-Auth's response next to. And that could be, oh yeah, that sounds like a great feature. Or it could be, oh, be careful with that.
My idea behind this pending condition, because I agree with you with like semantically, I agree that if it's approved, it's in a pending state. If it's not already signed, I agree with the semantics. But the reason why I wanted to add it is so that we have parity with a certificate request, because users today might be relying on the pending condition. Therefore, we can kind of offer the same like guarantees basically on this resource type. But like maybe we don't, and like maybe that's something we drop on.
Mel.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what is it giving more information that we already have with the current 3 approved, failed, and refused? Rejected.
So today,
Is it giving more information than that, or is it just like a user-facing thing?
So today we don't have the concept of approved certificate request in cert-manager, and I guess pending came from like the absence of that, because you need to signal to the user that it's being like processed but not failed, basically.
So
tell me I'm wrong.
Without wanting to just like, because I know, like you're saying, Josh, actually over time. Without wanting to go too much into it, I think what you're saying there about we want to make it easy for those coming along to from certificate request to continue to adopt it, to give them parity. I totally agree with your like goals there. I think though, given we are switching to a new resource type and we're talking about the transitionary period and so on, I actually think if we aim for our implementation of CSR to be as close and aligned to upstream as possible, and then use this transitionary time to get those changes and like have those discussions, then by the time it comes to actually switching it over entirely, we've had those hard discussions. We're not making any assumptions or making changes that aren't expected. We've at least had discussions, and even if they say we're not going to support that upstream, we can make that very clear then to our implementers, we do use a pending condition. However, it's optional. You can't rely on it always being there. X, Y, Z. We can actually have a solid, clear line. Yeah. And so maybe this is actually a chance for us to not have it in the new one. I'm kind of actually not too bothered either way, but if we go for the minimal thing, and then that's our beta period, right? It's where we're trying to iron out these issues and get these things supported.
Because as far as I'm aware, today pending is basically sugar anyway. It's not actually anything meaningful in terms of like as part of the API. Like it doesn't functionally do anything as far as I'm aware. It is just sugar to the user, I believe.
So sorry, when you say sugar, can the user fetch the same information from another place on the current certificate request?
Yeah.
When
so
you say sugar.
So pending doesn't functionally do anything. Like it doesn't have the same impact on the resource as something like setting the failed condition to true. Like pending just means that it's like not ready basically, but it exists in the world, I guess.
Yeah, but usually when we set conditions, we not only use usually we don't use them. Okay, on the cert-manager project, we use conditions for our own use also. But usually in Kubernetes, we set these conditions are set for other resources to use, and even though pending is not really used in the cert-manager code base, it is if we have it set, then it means it is something that users are expecting because it's like a change of state, and it's. But I'm not sure. Like, if you say it's sugar, then does it mean that the user can also know the same information differently, like by looking at another condition? Maybe it's just less like. So, yeah, how is the user able to know this same information without looking at the pending condition?
That approved is true, and the spec.certificate is empty, basically.
So
okay, thanks.
That makes perfect sense to me as an implementer to say, if this thing is approved, the certificate isn't there, then fall into your pending thing. Yeah, I mean, I again don't want to just drag this out into a discussion on pending. I think my point here was more, let's try and go for like meeting the CSR bar, and then this is honestly, it's these conversations, what you just said there, Mel, I think it's absolutely the right question to be asking. If it's something observable without already having to look at, like, conditions are often used to summarize the observable state of the world, right? Now, this is in a way a summarization of the observable state of the world, but it's actually a summarization of that resource, really. And to be fair, there are instances where that's been done before, I think.
Yes,
you
you're
could
right.
have deployment or replica set. So there is arguments for it. Totally. I think I'm really glad that this sort of a thing is actually starting to expose some of these things in the woodwork. Can't remember the word, but yeah.
Cool. Very quickly to get to the end. I also wanted to add the ready condition for similar reasons. I think it's quite nice to have a ready condition. But yeah, that's a conversation to have, I guess, later. API changes, adding the duration annotation, the CA annotation, setting this kind of RBAC API that we rely on, and the kind of approval condition semantics and what that means and how we set those. Upgrading should have no effects and should be fine. And then graduating, which we can maybe take offline. Create the signer implementation for each of the cert-manager IO issuers. These are active in the default cert-manager installation. Those certificate requests are the resource created from certificate resources. Then in another iteration, we can basically swap that too. So the kind of flag does the opposite thing on the controller. And then the third step is to remove the certificate request altogether.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for running all this as well and keeping keeping us in check and getting us through the doc, Josh.
No worries. It's a big subject.
The next Seek Oath meeting is on Wednesday, next Wednesday, coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. Oh, so I don't know who is supposed to be going there. Just wanting to mention this.
I've hit accept on my calendar now, so I will try and attend. I'd try and attend them more frequently. I think would be good. And I'll also I'll have a chat with Tim sometime this week as well to see if he's got any thoughts or just to kind of go over all this, or see if he wants to join one of these calls and discussions. I think now that we are starting to shore up and like come to a common understanding of the technical challenges and like the goals as well, I think we're probably in a much better position to have these conversations more widely than within teams. I think initially that, like when we first start discussing this, it can be difficult to make sure that we are all on the same page, and we could spend a lot of time getting distracted. We're all very good at talking about every other thing, or at least I am. But yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I'll have a chat with him and see. He's from Sigurth, the lead.
I will try and join the Sigurth meeting as well. You said it was Tuesday. Next Tuesday.
Wednesday.
Cool. So not today, next week. Yeah. Yeah, I'll try and join that. What do we want to do as a cert-manager team with this? Should I set up another meeting to iterate on it? Do we want to take it offline and then see where we are in like later on, or do we want to start mocking up implementing stuff? What do we want to do?
Happy to keep meetings going. I think it's been quite productive to have conversations about it, even if we do end out like working on an implementation alongside it or something. I think it's good for us to basically have this as almost like a working group style thing. I know we're not exactly big enough to have working groups, but yeah, I think I'm not against starting on an implementation. I think we should have a think, like basically the questions that we've discussed today, some of those might be more impactful for whatever provisional implementation you do than others. So we should probably get those cleared up, but yeah.
I think some code will never change, I guess. It's already kind of, that code will always be the same.
Big words. Some code will never change.
Cool.
When we if we have decided that we will potentially remove the certificate request, does that mean that there is no more, because there's like another PR for adding identity fields to certificate request? So would we then not do that?
I wanted to mention that. I think we still want to, because there will be a migration path that's longer than a release. That still needs to be done, I'd say. In my opinion.
I also personally think some of the things like the conditions that we discuss here, approved, denied, etc., can actually all be features of our certificate request API too. And the more that we get to that point, probably the easier it is going to be to bridge that gap between the two and ease that migration. Although that's a hunch, not a well thought out plan. So
that was my.
I would personally be in favour of pushing ahead.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Do we want to? What do you want to do about the? Okay.
I was just going to say it's a fair point that we do need to just consider and step through it in our heads to make sure that we're not actually, without realizing it, making our lives harder. I think it is making it easier because we're gradually getting too close together. But yeah.
Do we want to merge the identity document then? Maybe it needs more review.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I didn't. I can do a final pass of that today. Let me add that to my list, and then I think that was the non-controversial one, right, Josh?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it. I think it was all right after our non-controversial 1 hour talk.
Did we have 2 meetings with this
Most
one?
of what?
Is it just one? I can't remember.
I think we've only had one. Yeah. I think most of my thoughts on this are basically we should do nothing more than what the upstream API does.
Mm.
The complexities technically are around like validation after mutation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think we've already raised those and discussed them.
Mm. Yeah, I think the design is fine, I'd say. Merge my PR. No, I think the design is fine. It's the implementation, I guess, that's the tricky bit.
Yeah.
I've lost the PR. Where's it gone? Has it already been
The
merged?
identity fields one. It's underneath your blue one.
Ah, here, yeah.
One below.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Cool. Yeah. Cool. I'm gonna stop the recording.
I